Well, that's good enough for me.
Where'd you come from? Where have you been hiding?
Oh, I just floated down out of the clouds.
See, how'd you know this song?
I heard it
from... What would happen if we chose to really tell the truth about ourselves? Like if we really just told the real truth of our lives. I'm not saying that it's true. I'm saying that it's my truth.
You're listening to Hammered.
Growing up, I remember the phrase, getting up on the wrong side of the bed, or, oh, they woke up on the wrong side of the bed. And it seemed like it was sort of like a pass for the day. Like if a person was accused of waking up on the wrong side of the bed, then it was kind of like a justification for their grogginess or their, inability to get in a good mood. And I remember kind of feeling like I always got up on the wrong side of the bed. And I mean, the ancient roots of that whole thing is the ancient Romans believed that you get up on the right side of the bed, which was the positive, and the left side of the bed was the negative. So who knows? But I do believe that if your body, if your cells never really experience joy, then waking up in the morning is not like an overwhelmingly fun thing to do. And as a kid, I was really resistant. I didn't want to get up in the mornings. And I remember my mom would just sort of have to drag me out of bed sometimes. Literally, she would grab me by the ankles and pull me out of the bed. And I would hit the floor and get up. And I just always had this kind of impending doom. And I don't know if it's a chemical thing, but I remember one morning sitting at the breakfast counter and everybody was quiet. And, we got up really early, like 5 o'clock in the morning. And my dad, we'd all be sitting there. My mother always had breakfast, and I'm very grateful for that. But I remember this one morning I was just very tired. And I was probably in around the 10th grade. And I just looked at my mom. We sat at this counter, kind of like a bar, and we were all there, my brother, sister, mom, and dad, and I was beside my mother, and I just looked at her, and I kind of just made this sound like, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, she slapped me in the face so hard that it kind of spun me in this bar stool. And she said, "Don't you ever do that to me again." And I guess she thought that I was like making a face at her. I'm not really sure what she thought. But she said, "The next time you do that, I'll slap you under that TV set." And I remember my dad going, "What?" Like when it all happened. It was all weird. And she planted a little handprint on my face and actually drove me to school that morning to make sure I went into the front door. That was such a strange encounter to start the day with. And still to this day, I don't quite understand where it came from. I think everybody in my family got up on the fucking wrong side of the bed, is what it seemed like. Well, anyway, as a young child, around, late 60s, I was probably 7, 8 years old. My mom used to ask me sometimes on a Sunday if I wanted to go to a movie with her. And I became obsessed with movie and film, and she sort of passed that along to me. She grew up poor, and the big deal in her time was to get to go to the movies, to get to go to the theater. And she was kind of obsessed with movie stars like Betty Grable and Rita Hayworth and the old stars, the old, movie stars of that time. And she would say, hey, do you want to go to a movie? And sometimes she and I would go and nobody else would go with us. And usually she would try to see all the movies that were nominated for the Academy Awards. And I was really happy to get to go because it was kind of like this bonding time. And my mother had this real ability to predict who was going to win the Oscar. It was very strange. Like, she kind of could figure it out. We would kind of make the rounds every year and try to see all the movies. Well, I remember when she took me to see They Shoot Horses, Don't They?, starring Jane Fonda. And I could really relate to Jane Fonda's character in this movie. And, it's possible that her character could have been bipolar or manic depressive or something. There weren't the labels back then, but I just remember being really intrigued with her character because I could feel her depression. I could feel her despair. And it was very disturbing, but also validating. Like, I kind of felt like I was able to identify something because, there were just so many times that I would wake up on the wrong side of the bed, or I just felt bad and defeated at school, Second grade, I remember this teacher that called my mother and said, you need to take her to the eye doctor. Like, she just sits in class and her eyes are just tearing. And so my mom takes me to the eye doctor, and the eye doctor's like, there's nothing wrong with her eyes. She just doesn't blink. And, but I would be stuck in a stare, and I would go into this like daydream in the second grade. I'll never forget it. And I would stare out the window and I would think about going home and playing and just all the things I was going to do later. And it was sort of like a way of self-soothing, to daydream. And I was very visual, so I could see a movie in my mind. And still to this day, it's a way of sort of escaping or just relaxing, is to kind of go into this meditative place in my mind. And sometimes I just make up a whole fantasy and I just go with it like a little movie. But, in school, it's not really good because then they think, there's something wrong with you. And I'm sure today, in today's psychology, they might call it, dissociative disorder or something like that. I thought I was daydreaming. And so, of course, after going to the doctor, my mother was pissed because I'm not blinking my eyes enough. And then the teacher would have to remind me to blink so that I'd have tears running down my face in class. But the movie They Shoot Horses, Don't They? Was a very huge turning point in my childhood. Because in this movie, at the very ending, Jane Fonda asked the character, Michael Cerzan's character, to basically blow her brains out and end her misery. And says, they shoot horses, don't they? And I kept that in my mind. And my mom kind of reached over and tried to cover my eyes up. And I remember seeing the whole thing through her fingers. And that image stayed with me for a lifetime. And I remember sometimes in my most drunken, depressed states, I would say, they shoot horses, don't they? This turmoil, this inner turmoil, where does it come from? And so my mom and I would go and see all these movies, and then it would be time for the Academy Awards, and she'd be like, now you play your cards right, and I'll let you stay up. And the Academy Awards always came on a Monday night, and they were live, so they went on forever. And I remember just trying to keep my eyes open, and I would just, really bask in it. But I would go to school that morning of, and that would be one of the only mornings that I would wake up and be excited about something. I would have butterflies in my stomach and then go to school. I was like some kind of weird movie nerd. And I'd be like, are y'all going to watch the Academy Awards? And, kids in the second, third grade are like, huh? They don't even know what that is. And I would all day just couldn't wait to stay up with my mom and watch this show. And I remember throughout the years of all the different spectacles, and I remember the streaker running across the stage. And I remember when Marlon Brando sent the American Indian woman to not accept his reward, not reward, his Oscar. But just all these different time periods. And it was sort of like a barometer of what was going on in our country, and I remember just certain times of turmoil and war and things like that, but it was kind of a marker for me. But I often wonder what it is in our chemistry that allows joy or allows certain feelings to happen or not happen. And it's almost like maybe certain chemicals never developed. Maybe there was just a non-development of the joy chemical, and so finding these little escapes such as daydreaming and later alcohol and drugs and things to uplift this mood or this waking up on the wrong side of the bed, it was very crucial in my life. But the butterflies reminded me of the first day I went back to this ice cream business. Oh, Lord, I couldn't believe I was actually going to go back. Something pulled me back there, and I walked in that morning, and I remember going up to the window, and Chris was behind the window, and she's like, hey, let me give you this clipboard, and out comes another clipboard with another form, and she said, this is your inventory sheet. Just take this out and find Bill, and they'll do an inventory of your van, of your cooler. And when you get done, bring it back in. And so I went out, and I was kind of like, where do I go? And I got my van. I was number 7. And so they told me to pull up to this structure, which was this big silver looking box in the parking lot, which was actually a huge freezer. And so I got the van, I pulled it up, and this guy comes out of the cooler, out of the freezer. It was like a big walk-in freezer, and he had on like a army field jacket, and he was an African-American guy, and he looked like Sly Stone of Sly and the Family Stone. So out walks this guy, and he's got these big pork chop sideburns, and he's grinning. He's got a big old smile, and he's very nice. And he says, what's your name? And I said, Jill. And he says, I'm Greg. And he says, there's another Greg, freezer manager too. And I said, there's 2 of y'all? And they called him the freezer manager. And he said, yeah. He said, he says, they call me Black Greg. And I was like, whoa, it kind of took me for a second. And he laughed. And so there's Black Greg, and then there's the other Greg. And so I hadn't met him yet. But, so Bill comes out, and they get into my van, and they start going through this cooler and kind of organizing the boxes, the ice cream boxes. And I mean, I'm just standing there like I really just don't know what's about to happen. And I'm going along with them, and they're showing me, you got to be able to get to stuff quick. And they're sort of arranging things. And, then you got to put your top sellers the closest to the window so you can reach it quickly. And they've got this whole efficiency thing down. And so I just sort of go with it. And then he gives me the sheet, and he says, take this back in. So I take it back into Chris, and she grabs it, and she takes it back to the adding machine and kind of does some numbers. And apparently there was a dollar figure, a dollar amount that was placed on this form. And I just kind of blew that off like, well, I don't even know what that means, so I'm just not going to pay attention to that. And I guess, one day I'll find out what it all means. But at that point, I was just really nervous about going out in that fucking ice cream truck by myself. Well, they got me all loaded up, and so, I had my map, and Bill had sort of traced out on a map, some of these streets and everything, and I could pretty much remember because I had a really good sense of direction. And I grew up in Gwinnett County, so I kind of knew the streets, and for the most part, I knew I could figure it out. So I hit the road, and I was very, very uncomfortable with this situation. And I turned into the office park, and I started kind of, hesitantly ringing the bell. And I just rang it, and I tried to do it like him, but I couldn't. But I rang it, and I went down through, and then, I could see people start to come out, the business people, the office people, and throughout the entire commercial route, I was asked, where's that other guy? Oh, where's that guy? And some of them knew his name. Where's Bill? And so all day I was like competing with that, which was, of course, like, don't you like me? Like, come on. What am I, chopped liver? But, they would just kind of blow me off. And I would kind of say, well, I'm probably going to be taking over this route. And so I sold some, but, I was really shy about ringing that bell. But I continued on, and I did this entire office park, and I could tell that there was some potential. There was a couple of places that had warehouses and quite a few employees. And so it kind of planted a seed about, maybe getting a little more aggressive with the bell and get a little more happy, be little more friendly. And so I kind of knew what I needed to work on just at the end of that commercial route. So it was time to go into the residential, and so I went on and I found the Greens trailer park. And so I pulled in there, and I remembered what Bill told me to go really slow and sort of creep through there. And so I started ringing the bell, and I would just go really slow because I didn't want to hit a kid or a dog. And the kids, they look shocked, and then they kind of look at me like, who is that? And so I finally parked, and here they come, and their little grubby hands or their little grubby, some of them would have like a penny, some of them would have a rock, and they'd just be standing there. And so I kind of talked to them, and, and then there were the ones that actually had 50 cents or $1 or whatever. And so it'd take me a minute to find what they wanted because I didn't even know the packaging on these ice creams, and I'd dig around, and I think I probably gave some of them the wrong thing, but it didn't really matter. And so I just sort of made it through this trailer park, but I began to loosen up a little bit. There was, it was kind of like a relief, like, okay, I've made it through kind of the hardest part, I think. And I was kind of like, if I can get to Liberty Heights before dark, that's what's important. And so I got out of there, and then I remember turning into Liberty Heights, this famous neighborhood that I really knew nothing about. And when I turned into the neighborhood, I just beat the hell out of this bell, and I really, really rang it. And so that was interesting because it was a powerful thing to see how you could make this sound and then see a response. And so I kind of crept down the street, and I went from, grouping to grouping to grouping of people. And of course, the questions of where's the other guy, that was throughout the entire neighborhood. And there was sort of a sense of sadness amongst a lot of the people. And I just remember Bill telling me that, these people, they can't really afford to buy their kids much. He said, but, just the fact that they can buy them an ice cream might be the best thing they can do for them that day or that month. And that really that stuck with me. And so I had a lot of compassion towards these people. And I remember when I was little, and I remember hearing that ice cream truck. And I mean, we would rip a path through the woods to go get 50 cents, and get a red, white, and blue popsicle. I'll never forget that. And, there's something about that bell that would just send a visceral reaction through these children. And even the parents, and I think the parents were excited. And so I worked my way through, and I just, I really tried to stay in the moment. I didn't even know that's what I was doing back then, but I would try to say, okay, just be with these people, talk to them, be friendly, and then move on. And so finally, I made it to the very last house. And I remember the night before, Bill and I kept coming through, and the last house was actually a mobile home. And it was one of those that had kind of been built onto to make it look like a house. And it had like an awning, and, it just sort of looked kind of embedded. And so there was this guy standing there, and he had a mustache and a beard, and he had on like what they would now call like a trucker's cap. And we just called it a baseball cap back then. But he had one little girl. He was holding one little girl kind of on his hip, and the other little girl was standing on the ground kind of next to him, and he was holding a Schlitz malt liquor tall boy. And so I pull up, and it was dark, it was late, but he said, he kind of looked at me, and he's like, "Where's that other guy?" And I said, "Oh, he's not here tonight." I said, I'm going to be taking over this route." And he's like, "Oh." And so he kind of stood there, and the two little girls, they were gorgeous. They were these beautiful little girls. And they had both had really long hair and real kind of curly, and it was kind of blondish brown, and they looked like they needed like a good hairbrush. They, their hair was a little bit messed up and kind of knotted, but they were so sweet. They looked so precious, but there was a real sadness about these children, and I couldn't really pinpoint it, but it kind of was breaking my heart. And he said, "Well, all right, y'all, what do y'all want?" And he says, and he put the one little girl down on the ground, and they stood there, and he goes, "I'll be back in a minute." And so he went into the house, and they were standing there, and they were kind of real shy. And he came back out with $1. And he said, "All right, y'all pick something out. Hurry up." And they both picked out something, and he said, "You can't get that. 50 cents a piece." And I think they chose something that was 65 cents or whatever. But finally, they got what they wanted. He gave me the $1, and I drove away, and I felt just really sad. Like something about that situation felt off to me. But, I just thought, well, like Bill said, I mean, if that's the best they can do for their kids, then that's a big deal. And those kids will remember that, And as I drove away from there, I realized that, this is not about this ice cream. And this is not about this ice cream truck. This is bigger than that. This is something that, and I kept thinking about my own childhood, and I kept thinking about my own lack of joy, but things that brought me joy. And the ice cream truck always brought me joy. And so I drove back to the headquarters, and I really thought deeply about that, about how I could take that ice cream van and hopefully bring a light or bring some joy into these maybe not so light situations. And so I drive back and I finally pull in and I go and plug my van in, at my little designated parking spot, and go through the door, and there's all those guys, and they're all kind of standing around, and one of them's like, "How'd you do?" And I said, "Okay." And I had gotten a shoebox and sort of taped it, and made it so I could put my money in it. I was just copying what I saw these other people have, cigar boxes and different types of little boxes. So I go up to the window, and Chris was like, "How's it going?" She never was really excited to see you, but she was like, "How'd you do?" And so I put in a little box, and she gets it, and she starts getting the money out and dumping the change into the change counter and counting my money like a fucking card shark. And so she takes a couple of bills and throws them back in the drawer within my box and hands it back to me. And I look at the money, and it's like $18. And I said, $18? And she said, "Yep, that's what you get." And I said, "That's all?" And she said, "Yeah, you're on a commission." And and I was like, okay. And I just thought to myself, I can't do this. I'm not going to be able to do this. It's that $18 for all of that whole day. And so, I felt really, really discouraged. And then, I was like, well, and I'm not a quitter. I usually try, and I'm competitive, but I still just didn't know that there was any possibility in making money in this. But I just kept thinking about Regina's car. I kept thinking about that Supra, and how does she make all this money? So on my way out, this guy kind of yells, and he goes, "Hey, you want a beer?" And there was a little group of these guys outside, and they were kind of hanging around this one tailgate of this guy's truck. And so I went over, and I said, "Sure." And they gave me a beer. And the guy that asked me if I wanted the beer, he was like this kind of good-looking guy. He looked like Robert Redford in that movie Jeremiah Johnson. He had like the kind of strawberry blondish hair and kind of the thick mustache and scruffiness of a beard, and wore sort of a bomber jacket. And his name, he says, "I'm Rob." And I said, "Well, I'm Jill." And he introduced me to the cast of characters. There was this little round, kind of dumpy, short guy. And he says, "This is Dan, the ice cream man." And I said, "Hey." And he goes, "I'm Dan." And Dan was, he always wore like navy blue, like a navy blue Izod shirt and navy blue pants and kind of worn out little leather shoes, and had kind of fat fingers and kind of reddish hair, but very kind eyes. And he had a big vocabulary. I remember that. But so I said hey to him, and then he introduced me to this guy, Lee. And Lee had like the beginnings of a mullet. He was like, he wasn't there yet, but he was getting there. And he was like kind of one of those kind of guys that would sort of like, follow the cool guy around. He'd kind of follow the badass around and laugh at whatever he said. And so he seemed like sort of a follower. And he's like, "How's it going?" And I was like, "Good." And then this other guy, Chip, he was like a rocker. He had like this kind of fried, blondish, reddish, frizzy kind of hair, and these wire rim kind of octagonal glasses, and a tie-dye t-shirt. And I remember seeing his like red freckles on his arms, and he lived with his mother, who was disabled, and everybody was in their 20s pretty much. Rob, the guy in the bomber jacket, the Jeremiah Johnson guy, he seemed to be kind of older, maybe like 28, 27, somewhere in that range. But so for the most part, we stood out there in the parking lot and drank some beers, and that was kind of fun, and that was kind of, that helped kind of loosen me up a little bit, just so I didn't feel so crazy. And I just kept asking them, like, how in the world do y'all make money doing this? And, they were kind of giving me some tips and some, just some advice. And so I listened to him very close. And so I just decided that I was going to try to make the best of this and, really try to give it at least a couple of weeks to see if I would be able to sell. And so it just kind of perpetuated from that. I remember telling the girl that I had followed back from college that I was going to drive an ice cream truck, and she sort of laughed and thought that was pretty ridiculous. And so I had to really keep her on the lowdown because at this point, I was still very closeted, and it was the early 80s and it just wasn't safe to really talk about gay stuff. And so I kind of thought, maybe this being around a group of guys might help me to overcome my gayness. Good grief. Is that even possible? But I didn't have a whole lot of experience of having guys as friends. I'd always been around girls pretty much my whole life in sports. So that was kind of intriguing, and they all laughed and they kind of warmed up to me. Once we had our beers and everything, it got a little more comfortable. And so I think that also played into me coming back. I was such an attention seeker. I just wanted somebody to like me. And I didn't really know that I was that pathetic. I didn't really know that I was that starved for validation and recognition. But I was. And so any little, glimpse of likeness or love or response would kind of keep me interested.
Hammered is recorded and produced in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Asheville, North Carolina. It's narrated by Jill Haynie, produced by Maggie Briggs and Jill Haynie, and with sound design, editing, and music by Alexander Rodriguez. Our beautiful artwork was created by Lauren Caddick, and we'd like to send a special thanks out there to Minnie and Robin. You can check out our website, podcasthammered.com, and follow us on social media for updates.